All right, good morning, guys. And couple things for today. I wanted to go ahead and give you instructions ahead of time on today's lesson because I do have this due at 4:05 today. So I wanted to kind of get this started so that way you guys had time actually during class to complete this. So just a reminder, we went ahead and X-nayed, like we did not do number 10. It had you create a pedigree. You guys did not have to do that. The other thing I was going to tell you is if you guys go on Remind, I have given you guys 3 photos that give you the answer keys to the previous questions. So if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and do so at this time. You can pause this video. All right, so if you're here, that means you are ready to learn about the chi-squared statistics of the sickle cell disease. So let's talk about a couple things here. So remember, the reason that we use a chi-square statistic is to help us calculate whether or not something was predicted or something else is acted upon. So here's our situation. Multiple couples living in a small village in the eastern African lowlands, all of whom are heterozygous for the HBS allele, have 500 children among them. Of these children, 139 are homozygous for the HBA, 279 are heterozygous for HBS, and 82 suffer from sickle cell disease. Are these data statistically significant? Okay, so I would ultimately say this data, we're going to analyze it and decide whether that it is normal expected or is something else acting upon this. Okay, and so this is what they would actually start doing before they even figured out that sickle cell trait actually helped people in those African lowlands. So here's what we did. I went ahead and put normal RBC, AA, sickle cell trait, AS, sickle cell disease. Okay, so those are the 3 things that we are trying to compare. So you can pause this video and type that in at this time if you need to. Okay, the second column tells us what we observed. So those are the numbers that were given to us. So 139 of those children had normal red blood cells, okay, and they were homozygous for the AA trait, so they had normal hemoglobin. 279 had the sickle cell trait, so they had AS, and then 82 of them actually had the disease. So here's the thing, it's asking us what is expected. So if we had those parents who are all heterozygous for the HBS allele, then we see this chart right here. We actually did this problem. So everything we have done in this worksheet leads up to this chi-square analysis. So in this case, you would end up crossing the AS with an AS, and now you have your predicted outcomes. So on this one, to have normal red blood cells, so AA, we would only see 25%, and that's what we expect. So since there was 500 children, we want to multiply that by 25%. Just a reminder, you need to change that to 0.25. That'll give you your expected. Then you take your observed, so 139, minus your expected, okay, and that'll be this column. Then you're going to take that number, square it, so that's what that square is here, and then divide by your expected. Then the last step is to add all 3 of those numbers up, and that'll give you your chi-square value. Remember, the degrees of freedom is how many categories there are minus 1. There are 3 categories. Minus 1 would be 2 in this spot. The letter C is asking you to use the critical values table to determine the p-value. So whatever your number is in here, okay, and you use your degrees of freedom, you go down to page 12, and you decide where your number is, okay? Anything less than 0.5, okay, so anything less than this means that, or I'm sorry, anything less than 0.05, I apologize, sorry. So anything less than 5%, anything to the right of that, if that number falls within this range, that means that that's not the predicted outcome. That means that something else has happened to that population. So that's where we start talking about evolution and natural selection. So in this case, any number that is in this area right here means that something else is happening to that population. So we would reject the null hypothesis. Okay? So then you're going to use that data. Keep going up here. So you're going to use that and interpret the p-value and then explain its significance. And then which of the children had the greatest chance of survival and explain why. So we watched a video on it. We've talked about it in class, and then so you guys kind of get to summarize it there. So that is going to be for problem 11. You can pause this video right now to go ahead and finish this out if you need to. All right, if you are done with number 11, let's talk about number 12. All right, so number 12. There are 50 couples with the same blood type and hemoglobin genotypes. They live on a small, isolated Pacific island on which very few mosquitoes have been identified. All of the individuals are heterozygous for type A blood and have sickle cell trait. The 50 couples had 224 children over the years. The children were all tested for blood type and for the presence of the sickle cell allele. Here are the results. So we have type A, normal red blood cells. There was 48. Type O, so you can see the chart here. I'm not going to read that to you. So a couple things that I wanted to add here. This problem right here, you guys had to do in class. Okay, so you had to do this problem. So we already know this chart right here is going to give us our expected values for whether type A normal red blood cells, so there was 48. We should see for type A normal hemoglobin cells about 18.75% of that total population. So just know that this chart will become very handy in this next section. Okay, so since I put this in here, you guys can either screenshot it or you guys can take this problem from, let's see here, if you guys answered it, it should have been on question here. So this would be question 4, part C. You guys already have this. Okay, I gave you those instructions last Friday. So if not, like I said, you guys can just pause the video here and use this data. All right, so let's move on to the actual problem. So we're going to see, are these, I don't know if it's worded weird. So is this data significant? So we're going to explain using a chi-square statistical analyst test. All right, so here's what I did. I filled out this quick trick. If you go in and you just copy this, so I went ahead and just copied this, and I pasted it here so I didn't have to type all of that. You can do the same thing for this column because this is what is observed, and I just pasted it here. So that saves you a little bit of time. All right, so in this case, type A normal red blood cells, there was 48. What is our expected? Our expected for type A normal hemoglobin was 18.75 of the total population. And just a reminder, our total population is 224 children. So you take this percentage, turn it into a decimal, so 0.1875, multiply it by 224, and you're going to get your expected value. You do that for the entire column. You take your observed, so 48, minus your expected here. Then you're going to, in this last column, take your observed minus your expected and square it. Then you divide it by your expected. All right, so then you guys are going to do all this. Just a reminder, this last column, you add them all up, and that'll give you your x2, so your chi-square number, okay? And then you're going to calculate the degrees of freedom, and then once again, you're going to use page 12 to figure out if there's statistically significant. So that means, remember, if your number is over here to the right, anything less than 5%, that means that it is significantly it is significant, which just means that it's not by chance. Something else is acting upon that population, okay? So if it's in here, you reject the hypothesis. If it's over here to the left, you accept. Okay, so then remember on this one, you're going to go ahead and make sure that you are completing this. So if you guys need to pause it this time, you guys are more than welcome to do so to kind of fill that in, okay? All right, so this last question right here on letter F is kind of a bonus question, and I'll explain why here in a second. So, due to the increase in global travel and the prevalence of the invasive species, the Anopheles mosquito carrying the malaria parasite was inadvertently introduced to this isolated Pacific island. A researcher, 100 years from the present day, decides to complete a follow-up study and monitors another 50 couples who are heterozygous for type A blood and have the sickle cell trait. These couples had 136 children. Based on the introduction of the Anopheles mosquito carrying the malaria parasite, predicts scientifically logical observed numbers for children for each genotype possibility, and complete a chi-square statistical analysis test. Here's the thing. I want you guys in this column to predict how many you think is going to be of each. Totally your call. So you can say in this case, maybe you're like, okay, out of this population, I know that there should be more type A, right, with maybe some sickle cell traits. So maybe you put 70 here. Okay, so you know that that's going to be your biggest category because you know that those mosquitoes were introduced. And so you're thinking that maybe that'll be your biggest one. Let's say that maybe I put 19 here, and then I'm going to let you guys fill out the rest of the predicted. Then you guys are once again going to fill out your expected. You're going to take your observed minus your expected, fill out this last column here, and see if your predicted chi-square value is correct. Do your degrees of freedom, use the critical values and determine the predicted, and then from there, do you accept or reject? And based on what you know about hemoglobin, sickle cell disease, and blood type, and malaria, what selection pressures are acting on this population of children, and explain your answer. All right? So yes, you have a lot of chi-square analysis practice problems. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Thanks, guys.